Think about the last time you heard someone's rags to riches story. Maybe it was a podcast, a documentary, one of those I grew up with nothing and built a $50 million company interviews. And I bet your brain did what most brains do. It found the exception. It found the one thing about that person's story that made them different from you. Maybe they were exceptionally smart. Maybe they got lucky. Maybe they knew the right people, or they were just wired differently from birth. And so you filed the story under inspiring but irrelevant to my life and moved on. Here's the thing though, that filing system in your brain, it's wrong. And it's not your fault. It's actually a deeply human psychological pattern. But staying in that pattern might be the most expensive thing you ever do. Because when researchers actually study people who build wealth from nothing, not inherited wealth, not lottery winners, but real, ground-up, zero-to-something stories, they find something that most of us completely overlook. It's not about intelligence, it's not about timing, it's not even really about money. It's about how these people relate to discomfort in a way that most of us spend our entire lives trying to avoid. Let me explain what I mean. There's a concept in psychology called delayed gratification, and you've probably heard of it. Most people have. You know the famous Stanford marshmallow experiment, where kids who could wait to eat one marshmallow in order to get 2 marshmallows later ended up doing better in life across almost every metric. Better grades, better relationships, lower rates of addiction, higher income. The narrative we took from that study was simple. Patient people win. Self-control is the superpower. But here's what the popular version of that story left out. Later researchers revisited those findings and discovered something fascinating. The kids who waited weren't just more self-controlled, they were more trusting. Children from stable, reliable environments where adults kept their promises were far more willing to wait, because waiting felt safe to them. The kids who grabbed the marshmallow immediately weren't weak-willed, they were rational. They learned through lived experience that waiting often meant getting nothing. So when you look at someone who grew up with very little and still built something remarkable, you have to ask a different question than how did they resist temptation? You have to ask how did they learn to trust the future when their past gave them every reason not to? That answer lives in something psychologists call locus of control. And this, right here, is where the real divergence happens. People with an internal locus of control believe that their actions meaningfully shape their outcomes. People with an external locus of control believe that outcomes are mostly determined by luck, fate, or forces outside themselves. Now, neither view is entirely correct. Life is a mix of both. But here's the staggering part. Research consistently shows that people who build wealth from nothing scored dramatically higher on internal locus of control. Not because they were born that way, but because at some point, often a very specific, very painful point, they made a decision that most people never consciously make, the decision that they are the variable. Not the economy, not their family, not where they grew up, them. I want to be careful here because this is the part where conversations about success can become tone-deaf. I'm not saying external circumstances don't matter. They absolutely do. And some people face barriers that are genuinely unfair and deeply structural. But even within those constraints, the psychological shift that separates people who change their trajectory from people who don't is almost always this internal reauthoring of their own story. It's the moment someone stops saying, "This is happening to me," and starts saying, "What is this teaching me?" There's a neuroscience layer to this too, and it's worth understanding. When your brain perceives threat, financial insecurity, social rejection, uncertainty about the future, it activates the amygdala. This is your brain's alarm system, and it's brilliant at one thing, keeping you alive right now. The problem is, it's terrible at building a business, saving money, or making long-term investments, because the amygdala doesn't think in years, it thinks in seconds. People who grow up in scarcity often have a chronically activated stress response. Their nervous system is tuned to immediate threats. And yet, and this is what's so remarkable, some of them develop what researchers call post-traumatic growth, Not just resilience, but a kind of psychological upgrading that happens because of hardship, not in spite of it. They become better at reading people, better at managing uncertainty, better at operating under pressure, because they've had practice, lots of it. The people who build wealth from zero often have this quality in spades. They're not fearless, that's a myth. They're terrified, just like everyone else. But they've been trained by life to act alongside fear rather than waiting for it to disappear. And fear, as any entrepreneur will tell you, never really disappears. You just get better at dancing with it. There's another psychological pattern that shows up again and again in these stories, and it's one that almost nobody talks about. It has to do with identity, specifically with the gap between who someone is and who they decide they're becoming. Most people, when they think about change, think about behaviors. I need to save more, I need to work harder, I need to learn more skills. And behaviors matter, don't get me wrong, but behaviors are downstream of identity. Your actions will always, over time, drift back toward who you believe yourself to be. It's like trying to row a boat upstream. You can do it, but the moment you stop rowing, the current takes you back. People who build wealth from nothing, the ones who sustain it, who don't lose it and fall back, almost universally undergo what you could call an identity migration. At some point, they stop seeing financial growth as something they're doing and start seeing it as something they are. They start inhabiting the mindset of someone who manages money differently, who views risk differently, who sees problems as puzzles rather than dead ends. And that identity shift, quiet, internal, invisible to everyone else, is the real mechanism underneath all of the tactics and strategies people love to talk about. James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits when he says the most effective way to change behavior is to change your belief about the kind of person you are. But this isn't just self-help philosophy. It's grounded in decades of research on self-perception, cognitive consistency, and what Leon Festinger called cognitive dissonance, the deep discomfort humans feel when their actions don't match their self-image. When you shift your identity, your behaviors follow, because your brain can't stand the contradiction. So if you've ever wondered why some people seem to get it together almost overnight, why the change looks sudden even though it wasn't, this is usually what happened underneath the surface. A quiet, private, non-negotiable decision about who they are now, not who they hope to be, who they are, present tense, already. And here's the last thing I want to leave you with today, because I think it matters more than anything else in this video. The people who study wealth psychology, people like Thomas Stanley, who spent decades interviewing millionaires for The Millionaire Next Door, they keep finding the same thing. The defining characteristic isn't brilliance. It's not even hard work, though that matters. It's a particular kind of self-awareness, an honesty about where their energy is going, what their habits are actually producing, and what stories they've been telling themselves that might not be true anymore. That last part is the hardest, because our stories feel like facts. The belief that you're not good with money, or not the entrepreneurial type, or too old to start now, those don't feel like beliefs. They feel like the ground beneath your feet, and questioning them feels like falling. But the people who built something from nothing, they fell. They fell a lot. They just didn't let the falling be the end of the story. So here's what I'd ask you to sit with today. Not a strategy, not a tactic, just a question. What story about yourself have you been treating as a fact that might actually just be a story? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if this made you think about someone in your life who quietly rebuilt themselves from the ground up, share this with them. Sometimes people need to hear that what they did has a name and that it matters more than they know.